For my first ever full-on double feature review, I thought I'd take a walk on the weirder side and pair up two of the cultiest of cult comedies the early 90s had to offer. First up, there's Freaked from 1993, where Bill and Ted's Alex Winter gets one hell of an extreme makeover. Then there's 1991's Nothing But Trouble, where Dan Aykroyd not only writes and directs, but also stars as a huge dick.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
To many, he'll always be known as that guy from the Bill and Ted movies who wasn't Keanu Reeves. But there's more to Alex Winter than his beloved portrayal of Bill S. Preston Esquire. After Bill and Ted, Winter began to step away from the spotlight and pursue a career behind the camera. He had spent his youth as a stage actor, appearing in productions like The King and I and the acclaimed 1979 Broadway revival of Peter Pan with Sandy Duncan.
Can you really fly?
Winter then caught the directing bug while attending NYU's film school, where he met fellow film student Tom Stern. The two collaborated on many short films, including their 1986 student project, Squeal of Death, which feels like a precursor to Freaked with its zany visuals and absurd humor. In the short, Winter plays several members of the same family, which sort of foreshadows him playing his own grotesque grandmother in Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. After college, Alex Winter and Tom Stern made the move to Hollywood, where they continued to produce short films and music videos, and in order to keep up with his mounting college debt, Winter auditioned for acting gigs and landed several supporting roles, most notably in Joel Schumacher's vampire hit, The Lost Boys. So he went from starring in Peter Pan to The Lost Boys. Well played, Winter. But everything changed when he beat out hundreds of other young actors for a lead role in the 1989 surprise hit, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Excellent!
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure turned Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter into overnight superstars, especially among the younger crowd, which naturally caught the attention of MTV. Winter was hired by the network to develop a new series with his friend and fellow NYU grad, Tom Stern, and their mutual friend, writer Tim Burns, who had previously worked on the short-lived NBC series, The Jim Henson Hour.
Hi, I'm Alex Winter, and I'm going to be starring in this wacky new comedy series called The Idiot Box.
Their new show was The Idiot Box, featuring frenetic sketch comedy that certainly fell in line with MTV's edgy and experimental programming in the late 80s and early 90s. The Idiot Box was a hit when it debuted in 1991, but due to budgetary issues, it lasted only 6 episodes. The series may have been short-lived, but its chaotic absurdity would live on in the creator's next venture. Alex Winter and Tom Stern were friends with musician Gibby Haynes, the frontman for the popular 80s and 90s punk rock band Butthole Surfers. And for years, they wanted to make a super low-budget horror film that could be a vehicle for Haynes' band and have a sense of humor similar to The Idiot Box. Originally written under the title Hideous Mutant Freaks, Alex Winter described it as Beach Blanket Bingo meets The Evil Dead. So would have watched that. Winter, Stern, and their fellow Idiot Box creator Tim Burns all wrote the script, which they kept trying to sell to different studios. But once Winter gained notoriety from Bill and Ted and The Idiot Box, 20th Century Fox offered them a $12 million budget for Hideous Mutant Freaks, but only if they toned it down to a PG-13 horror comedy. Winter and Stern became the co-directors, with the studio basically giving them full creative freedom. Even though Freaked started out as a completely different beast, you can still see its punk rock roots splattered all over the final product, with its heavy metal soundtrack, subversive comedy, psychedelic animation, and an onslaught of ambitious makeup effects that just make you want to puke.
Yeah? Well, you're no Mona Lisa's yourself.
Co-writer and co-director Alex Winter also headlined the rather eclectic cast of Freaked, including Randy Quaid, Brooke Shields, Michael Stoyanov, Megan Ward, Mr. T,
How you doing?
Bobcat Goldthwait, future Oscar nominee John Hawkes, Morgan Fairchild, Larry Bud Melman, and other names that probably mean nothing to you if you're under 30.
Ooh, it's so exciting.
There's also a fun little Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey reunion with former Grim Reaper William Sadler as a sleazy corporate chairman and an uncredited Keanu Reeves as Ortiz the dog boy.
The production overall was characterized. Yes, it was characterized by pain and misery, which is why we came up with the slogan, at least on the set, of entertainment through pain and misery, which was the film's kind of slogan, and it was also the cast's slogan, because everybody was in some kind of physical discomfort. Alex with his half face, with the gum dentures that hurt him quite a bit, and Megan and Michael with their half man and half woman, like walk around like this with crutches all the time, and Nosy with his Jeff Kahn wearing his 50-pound head, and Worm who couldn't touch anything, and even Keanu wearing the dog makeup that made his face itchy, but he couldn't go near it, and so everybody was miserable and complaining, except for Mr. T, who the only thing he had to do was wear a dress, but he was pretty unhappy about that most of the time too. At the end of it, I think we were all just glad that it was done and that it would be consigned to the scrap heap of film history, which luckily has happened until now, until some idiot decided to dig this whole thing up and try and foist it upon the unsuspecting public once again. I'm sorry for that, really, truly.
Alex Winter plays Ricky Coogan, a narcissistic former child actor who's hired by the makers of a dangerous toxic fertilizer to fly down to the company's South American research facility to promote the product and face off against environmentalist protesters. But in a grim twist of fate, Coogan is captured by demented scientist and freak show proprietor Elijah C. Scuggs and is transformed into a hideous freak by the same chemicals he was hired to defend. Made for a relatively low $12 million, Freaked is a movie where you can see every cent of its budget on screen, and the masterminds behind the ambitious makeup and effects are a veritable who's who of fantasy and horror veterans. The film's whacked-out opening titles were created by stop-motion animator David Daniels, whose unique claymation style has been seen in Pee-wee's Playhouse, Peter Gabriel's Big Time music video, and Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. The film's overall look was originally designed by Japanese effects artist Joji Tani, better known to cult film fans as Screaming Mad George, whose insane work with goopy rubber lives up to his name and has been seen in other cult favorites like Big Trouble in Little China, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, and Bride of Reanimator. Additional effects were supervised by Tony Gardner, whose works include Return of the Living Dead, Army of Darkness, and several of the Chucky sequels, and creature effects artist Steve Johnson, who had worked on Fright Night, Ghostbusters, and Night of the Demons. Also, some moments of stop-motion animation were created by the Kyoto brothers, whose other credits include Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Critters, Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and Ernest Scared Stupid. That's quite a laundry list of talent and innovation that went into such an insanely silly film, and there's no denying the genuine artistry at work here. It's just a shame nobody saw it.
I'm Tom Stern.
I'm Alex Winter.
And here you are on a set of hideous mutant freaks. A cavalcade of atrocities so horrific, we advise the more sensitive members of our television audience to turn off your sets this time.
With the production of Freaked nearing completion, 20th Century Fox was still in its corner. Various merchandise was even created, and behind-the-scenes promotional segments were running on Entertainment Tonight and the E! Network. But the tide completely changed when Fox studio head Joe Roth was replaced by Peter Chernin, who despised the film, especially after some poor test screenings.
The studio president said to our agent, supposedly, he said, "I like you guys. I think you're all very talented. I think the boys are very talented. They've written a fine script and a funny movie, but I hate it and I'm going to bury it." So we went from thinking we were going to be the next big thing to realizing we were talentless hacks. It's probably good that we learned that sooner in life instead of later. I mean, I wouldn't be the excellent cheese farmer that I am now if I hadn't figured out how much I suck at showbiz.
The remaining budget was completely gutted, leaving the film with no marketing and a canceled nationwide release, despite some positive critical responses following the film's premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival in September 1993. But on October 3rd, 1993, Freaked opened in all of 2 theaters, making less than $30,000.
In Freaked, coming soon to a theater.
Well, that's a lie. It was 2 theaters. The movie was then dumped onto home video and forgotten about in the blink of an eye.
Welcome to show business, morons!
What happened to Freaked is a filmmaker's worst nightmare and a real Hollywood story gone wrong. It became a casualty of a major movie studio's changing regime, which probably explains why, even to this day, it's still a bit of a rarity. But because it is so subversive and unique, it deserves way more love and attention. The pure comedic anarchy brought to life with high-level practical effects is something you hardly ever see out of a big studio film, and that alone makes Freaked worth seeking out. In 2005, Anchor Bay released this 2-disc DVD edition of Freaked, which was packed to the rafters with bonus material. Then came the Blu-ray in 2013, that came with nothing. Nada. Not even a main menu. And as of the making of this video, both the DVD and Blu-ray appear to be out of print and go for pretty hefty prices online. In all my years of doing this show, I was afraid this day would come. The day where I review a movie that isn't readily available on any physical media. But I have it, and I want to show it off like the man-child I am. And as time goes on, this will probably start to happen more often. So that's why it's time to introduce a brand new segment.
What the hell is that?
Disc 1 presents the feature film and an informative and funny audio commentary recorded by Alex Winter and Tom Stern. Also included is Hijinks in Freakland, a 12-minute compilation of behind-the-scenes footage, and a conversation with writer Tim Burns, an interview with the film's third writer, who talks about working on the movie with a bone-dry sense of humor. Additionally, we get the theatrical trailer, a handful of deleted scenes that I believe were left in the UK cut, a gallery of concept art, early poster designs, and storyboard panels, and a nicely dated DVD-ROM feature that lets you read the screenplay in a PDF file. Lastly, a hidden Easter egg gives us a couple more minutes with writer Tim Burns. On Disc 2, we get Freaked, the rehearsal version, an 84-minute camcorder film presentation of a full-length script rehearsal that includes material that didn't make the final cut. There Are No Weirdos Here gives us more rehearsal footage, and It's the Troll is even more rehearsal footage, spotlighting young actor Alex Zuckerman as his character Stewie Gluck, Ricky Coogan's obnoxious #1 fan. Under construction is nearly 4 minutes worth of home movie footage capturing the construction of the Freakland set, and Behold the Beast Boy gives us a glimpse at the painstaking process of applying Alex Winter's elaborate makeup. Lastly, we get 2 of Alex Winter and Tom Stern's NYU student films, the previously mentioned Squeal of Death, and a brief assignment for a sight and sound class. Also included was a supplemental booklet with a funny write-up by Freaked superfan Michael Felsher, the owner of Red Shirt Pictures, the company behind the making of tons of bonus material for countless DVD and Blu-ray releases. So yeah, a great set that you can't get. And none of these extras ended up on the Blu-ray, which you also can't get. Man, Shout or Scream Factory or even Arrow Video needs to give Freaked the collector's edition Blu-ray treatment it so rightfully deserves. But in the meantime, at least we can rely on streaming it or downloading a copy of it from the always reliable Netflix, iTunes, or Amazon. Or not. Freaked is a tough one to peg down, mainly because it's so weird it doesn't fit comfortably into one particular genre, but there is nothing wrong with that. It pokes fun at pop culture one second and then strives for a dash of social commentary the next. But ultimately, it's unapologetic in its tasteless humor and lack of any real sincerity. It's got absurd visual gags worthy of a Naked Gun film and well-orchestrated slapstick straight out of the Three Stooges. It's UHF meets Tales from the Crypt. Monty Python meets Army of Darkness. Ren and Stimpy meets Scooby-Doo. It's Mad Magazine meets Fangoria Magazine. It's a better Garbage Pail Kids movie than the f***ing Garbage Pail Kids movie.
Totally cool.
Anyway, you get the point. Freaked may not be the easiest movie to track down at the moment, but by all means, do yourself a favor and find it as soon as you can, if you've got the stomach for it. I'll give Freaked a 3 out of 5.
I say we kill him.
During the 80s, Dan Aykroyd not only starred in an endless string of movies, he also created 2 of the decade's biggest comedies, The Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters. The Blues Brothers began as a reoccurring musical act on Saturday Night Live consisting of Aykroyd and fellow cast member John Belushi. This spawned a chart-topping live blues album in 1978, then the 1980 musical comedy epic directed by John Landis from a script initially written by Aykroyd, who crammed as many ideas as he could into one bloated screenplay. Landis then swooped in and turned Aykroyd's massive thesis into a much tighter shooting script.
I really didn't know how to write movies. I didn't know anything. I don't think I'd ever even seen a screenplay. I was told that most screenplays were, 120 to 150 pages long, but when I sat down to write The Blues Brothers, there were so many descriptive passages in there, just paragraphs and paragraphs of shots, of concept, of ideas, of descriptions, and I had the idea that, well, what I'll do here is put it all in one volume, even though it would be prohibitively long.
Dan Aykroyd had written actually a 324-page script that actually had a story for recruiting each member of the band individually. Now that script, which by the way was delivered to me in the covers of the Valley Yellow Pages, because it was as big as a phone book, so I think Dan Aykroyd tried to take a little of the sting out with a little humor, actually making it look like a phone book.
There's no way to shoot this. It was pretty incoherent, but it had great ideas and epic characters and a real respect for the music, and it was pretty, it was big. It was big. The thing about Dan Aykroyd, he's a marvelous writer, and what he has that's really great are ideas. His conceptions are so strong.
The Blues Brothers was a huge hit, and Aykroyd went to work on his next idea, which was inspired by his fascination with parapsychology and the supernatural. Aykroyd wrote The Ghost Smashers, a buddy movie that was to star him and John Belushi as ghost hunters who could travel through time and space. It ended up being another gargantuan screenplay, which he ran by Ivan Reitman, the director of Meatballs and Stripes, who liked pieces of it, but overall found it to be unfilmable.
Dan's the real genius behind all of this. He wrote a script called Ghostbusters for himself and John Belushi. How long ago was that, Dan?
Yeah, late 81 really was when I really started to write it, in late 81, yeah.
But there was these brilliant things. There was, at its heart, this wonderful central idea that here are a group of guys sort of operating much like firemen, but instead of putting out fires, they were catching, supernatural things. And I think the idea of the fire hall was there, the no ghost symbol.
Yeah, it definitely was hewing more towards, the underworld, that type of franchise. And I think we were right to lighten it up. And well, what happened at Art Stelly in our first meeting was you said, how about bringing Ramis?
After John Belushi's death in 1982, the project was retooled, and director Ivan Reitman suggested that Aykroyd rewrite the script with Harold Ramis, who was a co-writer on Animal House and Meatballs, and had directed Caddyshack and National Lampoon's Vacation. Ramis reshaped Aykroyd's lofty ideas into a more relatable and grounded story about New York City-based paranormal investigators who start their own spectral extermination business called... Wait, the name escapes me. Back in the late 70s, while Dan Aykroyd was still a cast member on SNL, He was pulled over one night for speeding through a small town in upstate New York. Instead of letting him pay for his ticket on site, he was escorted to a run-down old mansion to appear before the local justice of the peace. But after the trial, he was invited to stay for tea and was there for 4 hours. He never forgot the bizarre event and was later inspired to turn it into a script after attending a screening of Clive Barker's Hellraiser in 1987 with his younger brother Peter Aykroyd and producer friend Robert K. Weiss. Aykroyd had starred in 2 big hits for Warner Brothers, Spies Like Us in 1985 and Driving Miss Daisy in 1989, with the latter earning him an Oscar nomination. So Aykroyd had some clout at the studio, which greenlit the horror comedy script written by Aykroyd, with his brother Peter getting a story credit, but no one was attached to direct it. Writer-director John Hughes turned it down, as did Blues Brothers and Spies Like Us director John Landis, so to avoid a delayed production, Aykroyd reluctantly offered to direct it himself. Describing the tone as Beetlejuice meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Aykroyd was a nervous first-time director, but he was surrounded by some top-shelf Hollywood talent, including Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit cinematographer Dean Cundey, RoboCop and Total Recall production designer William Sandell, Die Hard and Lethal Weapon composer Michael Kamen, Nightmare on Elm Street and Terminator makeup artist David Miller, and special effects supervisor and frequent Spielberg collaborator Michael Lantieri. So with such an accomplished crew and a cast full of familiar faces, Aykroyd had nothing to worry about. I mean, the guy had already made a huge splash in the horror comedy genre with Ghostbusters, so his new project had all the makings of a surefire hit. Right?
Right?
Chevy Chase and Demi Moore play 2 New York yuppies who make a wrong turn on their way to Atlantic City and find themselves in a small village town called Valkenvania. They get pulled over by stern Officer Dennis Valkenizer, played by John Candy, who brings them in to stand trial before his grandfather, demented Judge Alvin J.P. Valkenizer, maniacally portrayed by Dan Aykroyd. The trial is delayed, and the group is forced to spend the night, but it's more likely they won't be leaving at all. Aykroyd is insanely fun to watch as an ancient, sadistic, southern fried psychopath, almost like an early prototype of a Rob Zombie character. And as a director, he clearly had big ideas for Nothing But Trouble. Maybe a little too big. The film boasts some amazing and painstakingly detailed production design that turns Valkenizer's junkyard compound into a twisted carnival ride to hell. His mansion is a character in and of itself.
Okay, let's eat.
And with this and Ghostbusters, Aykroyd seems to have a thing for homemade gadgetry. Fresh off the highest grossing film of 1990, Ghost, Demi Moore is constantly getting tossed around by booby traps and giant mutant man babies. But man, is she giving it her all. Sadly, John Candy's usually brilliant comedic chops are a bit wasted here, despite playing 2 different roles: Valkenizer's self-serious grandson and his mute twin sister Eldona. Then there's Chevy Chase in the lead role, who does seem to occasionally slip back into his signature deadpan delivery that works for characters like Clark Griswold or Ty Webb, but in this, he's just sleepwalking through most of it, and evidently, he and Aykroyd did not get along on set. Chevy Chase not getting along with a crew member? Who ever heard of such a thing? With a production now well over budget, a cantankerous lead actor, and having to play 2 roles covered in heavy makeup, Dan Aykroyd understandably buckled under the pressure. It's been said that he ran the production as smoothly and as friendly as he possibly could, but once the execs at Warner Brothers saw the finished product, Nothing But Trouble would truly become Nothing But Trouble. Since its 1991 release, Nothing But Trouble has been defined by its massive box office failure. After going over budget, it earned back less than a quarter of it despite a wide theatrical release and high-profile cast. It became a pretty popular film to pick on at the time, getting nominated for 6 Razzie Awards, as many critics declared it as one of the worst films ever made. Ha! But one generation's trash can be another's guilty pleasure. I grew up catching bits and pieces of this movie when it would run endlessly on cable TV, not knowing until later just how panned it was. And gradually, I'd start to see the tiniest of cult followings start to bubble up under the movie's ashes. a common online phenomenon where some of the oddest forgotten films get a historical reevaluation. I still don't think you can call it a great movie, but what I like about it is that Aykroyd's passion for it still shines through. His bizarre performance as Judge Valkenizer alone is worth a watch, and the movie does actually have its place in history. Like a scene right out of the Blues Brothers, the film screeches to a halt about halfway through for an extended musical number by the hugely popular early 90s hip-hop group Digital Underground, as they perform their catchy dance track, Same Song, while Aykroyd wails away on a pipe organ. The group had just scored a #1 hit with the Humpty Dance, and among them was fresh-face up-and-comer Tupac Shakur. This song, and its music video, would become a real turning point in Tupac's career, who went on to release his first solo album later that same year. Well, at least there's a few ways you can watch this one. The original DVD is useless though, as it presents the film with antiquated picture quality in a 4:3 aspect ratio. And do I even need to mention that there aren't any special features? In fact, this DVD is so old, this is what the menu looks like. Ooh, jump to any scene. Take that, VHS. So, in another rare occasion here on the DVD shelf, I recommend skipping the physical copy altogether and instead grab an HD copy of it from iTunes and other digital services. The HD version is a massive step up that better captures the film's scope and shows off Dean Cundey's great cinematography way better than this fossil ever could. I could almost see the Warner Archive collection eventually releasing this on a bare-bones Blu-ray, but like with Freaked, I'd rather see Scream Factory or Arrow Video take a crack at it and include plenty of bonus content, along with the fantastic original movie poster painted by fantasy artist Boris Vallejo, which was scrapped by Warner Brothers at the 11th hour and replaced by this bland rush job.
Just like a bunch of spiders in a birthday cake.
If iconic comedies like The Blues Brothers and Ghostbusters have taught us anything, it's that while Dan Aykroyd is a genius idea man, he needed another voice or two to rein in his vision. But Nothing But Trouble didn't have the accomplished filmmakers like John Landis on The Blues Brothers or Harold Ramis and Ivan Reitman on Ghostbusters to filter out the best of Aykroyd's ideas. Nothing But Trouble is an entertaining ride with a weird sense of humor that isn't particularly hilarious, but the movie isn't always trying to be a flat-out comedy anyway, just really strange and occasionally off-putting for some. Aykroyd was a first-time and what would be only-time director who worked with some other huge talent to create a crazy world that was part Goonies, part Beetlejuice, part Addams Family, part Rocky Horror, and especially part Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Well, specifically Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. Aykroyd had creative freedom during the production, yet I don't think he quite stuck the landing he wanted to. Some of that could actually be the fault of the studio, which evidently shredded it after the fact to bring it down from an R to a PG-13. But when you watch it, you can still kind of see what it was going for, even if some of the ideas feel half-baked. It's a mess, but a fun and unique mess that gets by with a pretty memorable performance from Dan Aykroyd. Compared to Freaked, it's definitely the lesser of the two trips through the Funhouse, but still worth a look. With no definitive DVD or Blu-ray release yet that could have possibly elevated my final recommendation, I'll give Nothing But Trouble a 2 out of 5.
You know, you are worse than a week of yellow shitstorms.
Back in the 90s, 2 actors became directors and got the chance to concoct a couple of crazy carnival rides crammed with quotable lines, gross-out gags, and cartoonish chaos, all before being completely f***ed over by their studios. They may not have gotten a whole lot of love back in the day, but put them together now and you have one deranged double feature that'll surely turn your stomach. I guarantee it.